I'm Robin Ewing, and I would like to start this evening by acknowledging and paying respect to our First Nations Australians, and to acknowledge that in their cultures, arts and story are at the centre of their knowing, doing, being, and becoming. And we have so much to learn from how they put them at the centre of their lives and learning. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm joining from Gadigal country. You might like to pop in the chat where you're joining from. Also want to acknowledge that the Aboriginal land was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Well, tonight we're in for a treat. I want to thank you all for joining us, and also to introduce our wonderful speakers, Dr. Amanda Niland and Dr. Olivia Karaolis. Just very briefly, because I know you will have read their bios, both have had long careers in the field of early childhood education. Amanda has taught in a range of early childhood, primary school and early intervention settings. She taught in undergraduate and postgraduate programs at Macquarie University for more than 10 years before joining us at the University of Sydney in 2016. Amanda has a range of interests in early childhood, but particularly in music and creative arts education, children's literature, inclusive education and disability studies, and she is a published children's author. Olivia teaches at the University of Sydney also in the School of Education and Social Work. For some years, she was adjunct professor of early childhood education at Santa Monica College. She has a master's in special education and a degree in drama with 20 years of experience teaching drama to children and young people with disabilities. One of her wonderful projects was the UC Play project with United Cerebral Palsy in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara and Ventura, where she brought creative arts classes to hundreds of students with disabilities. Olivia's PhD explored drama as pedagogy for inclusion. I'm going to hand over to both of you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Robin. I'm Amanda, and it's an honour to be here and as part of the Create webinar series for this year. And thank you to Robin and Michael for their wonderful leadership of the centre, and for Anna for all her amazing organisation. So I'm coming to you today from the land of the Gundungurra people in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, and it's a very beautiful part of the land, and I'd like to acknowledge and honour the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land. Olivia, would you like to say hi and where you're coming from today?
Hello, and yes, thank you to Robin and Michael and to Anna. I'm also in a beautiful part of the world. I'm on Gadigal land, which belongs to the Karingai people, which I think Karingai name comes from. I'm starting to see the connection. And I'd like to acknowledge that land and how grateful I am to be here tonight with you and with you, Amanda. It's lovely to present with you.
Olivia and I share passions for creativity and nurturing young children's creativity, and also for inclusion, for valuing every child and what every child brings to the world, to their families, communities and education settings. So tonight we're going to explore some stories from our lives, our professional lives as inclusive early years educators and great nurturers of the arts, and to also seek some thoughts and ideas from all of you. So we thought we would start by sharing a tiny bit about what inclusion means to each of us. And this quote by the American poet Maya Angelou is something that sums up quite a lot of our thinking. So inclusion to me is actually something that, although much of the world, much of the educational world sees it as something really hard, challenging, complex, I see it as actually something very simple, which is that every child is valuable, every child has something to contribute, and that every child has the right to an education where they feel a sense of belonging, a sense of being valued, and a sense that they can be heard and their needs can be met. So I'll hand over to Olivia.
Like Amanda, this quote by Maya Angelou speaks to me in terms of the way we see disability and the way we see resource. We see disability as a resource, and we see diversity as a resource too, and that all of these are part of our unique natural experience. And when we see the world differently, which children with disabilities often do see the world and perceive the world differently to how we expect them to. It reminds me of what an artist is, that they bring that different perspective to the table and enrich all of us.
So we thought at this point it would be really nice to just, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen just for a moment and ask everybody here to pop something in the chat, even just one word that sums up for them what inclusion is. So we'll just give you a moment to have a think and pop something in the chat. It can be 2 words if it needs to be.
I did 4.
Equity. That's a really important one. Notice that Michael hasn't said equality, because that equality would be as if we're all the same, we all need the same things, and we're not. Equity is great. Acceptance.
Yes.
Oh, we have a very interesting link for us all to follow.
Yes, thank you.
And agency. Oh, I love that. And acceptance, a sense of belonging. Agency, yes. Some sort of power and autonomy and belonging, of course. We've got obviously a very attuned gathering tonight, which is fantastic. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slides. So tonight we're going to talk about why the arts are such powerful and valuable ways of realising and nurturing inclusive approaches in classrooms. And we're particularly sharing stories from the early years, the prior to school settings that we both have a lot of knowledge and experience of, but happy to bring the discussion at some point into the school sector as relevant to anybody here. So we think that because of the inherent diversity in the arts that Olivia's already mentioned, and those different ways of seeing the world, and the rich, has many rich possibilities. And we thought we would address these particular 3 themes that we see as important to inclusion. The first being connection, and the fact that we inherently need but also want and have this innate drive and instinct to connect with each other. That is something that's very important for us as educators not to forget about. Also, the importance of relationships. Teaching's not about imparting knowledge per se. It's really happens, and learning happens in relationships. And so nurturing those relationships is a huge part of every teacher's role. And then the idea of voice, that the arts gives ability for children to use different modes of communication to express their thoughts and feelings and ideas. So remembering that not just because of developmental capabilities of young children, but just because we are inherently creative, imaginative beings, that children have many ways, and adults too, of expressing themselves. So we're going to share some stories around each of these three themes, beginning with the theme of connection. And I'm going to hand over to Olivia.
One way to connect that I found in my research with children and in my teaching with children is through a puppet. So you may see Mabel on the screen, but you will also see Mabel hopefully here. Hello, Mabel. And why a puppet is such a valuable tool for connection is, yes, children generally like puppets, but children often will prefer to engage with a puppet, particularly children who experience disability, because if you look at me and then you look at the puppet, you will see someone giving a lot of information that's quite busy, and then you will see something that is quite static and quite solid. So you'll see that she's just got two colours. She's very clearly able to discern what she is. And they will like the adult who is connected to the puppet. So often when you're working with children, suddenly you're less threatening. You are much more easier for the children to read. This Mabel in my story I never leave home without her. And I remember using her once with a child who had very little language to develop yet. But he would talk to Mabel. And I found out completely by accident during circle time in the morning when I just took a punt and I turned over and I got him Mabel to say, good morning. Let's say his name was Jack. And Jack turned around and said, good morning, Duck. And this was a little boy who we did not think was able to use two-word sentences together. So the puppet was like this conduit, like this connection between me and this child, and then this child, and then other people. So it brings about the puppet brings about a sense of belonging.
You had another slide here about...
I do. And I'll put Mabel down and I'll speak back to this. Puppets are a way of gaining children's attention. And you'll see in this slide, there is me with a very large shark who I used to take to this program on the bus, which got lots of attention and focus from people asking me, did he need a ticket? Does he bite? Bruce was the name of this shark, and he was an absolute hit in the preschool that I was working at, particularly with two boys who had been concerned with the teachers because of their behaviour with one another. They were quite aggressive sometimes with each other, and one boy in particular had a diagnosis of autism, and the other boy, the teachers thought that he was going to receive a diagnosis. This was the children that they were really concerned about. They couldn't attend in small group activities. They'd be running around the classroom. When Bruce came, he didn't require any of the teachers to say, nice hands, nice feet, come and sit down. They just came. And Bruce asked the children to teach him how to be part of preschool because he was nervous about coming to preschool. So this great, big, ferocious looking, tiger shark, suddenly didn't have any power. And he empowered the children. And what surprised the centre director was that after a couple of workshops in drama with Bruce, she was on the playground and one of these little boys went over to another child who was excluding another little boy from play and said to him, remember what Bruce said, you have to include everybody in play. You have to remember what Bruce said. And it surprised her, that a child that she didn't expect who wasn't following the playground rules, was able to actually recall the puppet and use the puppet as a way to remind the other children to be friends. So the puppet was regulating the children and supporting their learning and their playfulness, even when he wasn't there. And I think that story has always stayed with me about how much we underestimate what children can do once we speak in their language. And Bruce was able to help us find this children's language.
So I would like to share a story of musical connection from a project that I did a couple of years ago in a preschool in the inner west of Sydney with a very inclusive program and a lot of music in the daily life of the centre. And this photo is not actually from that preschool, but at that preschool there were a lot of children from different parts of the world, and or there still are, and quite a high number of children with different levels of English and different levels of communication and different abilities. So in the centre, they always worked very hard to find ways to connect children with each other, to both model that and facilitate that through play. And they had set up, due to some children's recent life experiences, a campfire that wasn't lit, and with some sort of arrangements of seating around it, so that it was a place to just come and gather together. And there were also a few musical instruments in a basket. And the children gathered and started talking about what you do at a campfire, and one of them was talking about how they went camping and they had a campfire and they sang songs around the campfire. So the educator encouraged them to sing songs, and first they all sang a song together that they all knew, one of the preschool daily sort of favourite songs, and then one child sang a song in her first language, which was Mongolian, and another child sang a song in her first language, and they all really enjoyed each other's songs. And what it led to was that the child who had sung a song in Mongolian was actually on her first day at the preschool, and through the singing together became friends with the other child who'd sung a song from her first language. And it sort of led to that child feeling a sense of belonging and being more confident in the preschool, of having made a friend through sharing and singing together around this campfire. So it was a lovely example of connection, nurtured by an educator, but just spontaneously amongst the children. So we come to our next theme, which is relationships, and Olivia is going to speak more about puppets.
So this preschool was quite a very big focus on school readiness, and there was the priority of parents really was getting children's literacy ready for school. There wasn't a lot of play, and there was 3 children in a class of 28 who had a disability, and who, from what I could observe, were often quite separated in pretty much every aspect of the children's day. They would have one-on-one support with an educator, and they weren't being included in any aspect in the same way that the other children were. And so what I wanted to do was to use the puppets to help the educators to build their relationships with the children, and not see that these children were the responsibilities of just one other adult, but also to build the children's connections to one another, for the children to start playing and exploring and with one another and sharing their ideas. And what's so beautiful about puppets is they're so open-ended. So in this picture here, we are actually acting out different animals that we could find when we were going on the bear hunt. And the children got up and We were using our bodies to shape different animals, to make sounds from different animals. There wasn't any particular right or wrong animal. And when I looked back at the images, what surprised me is one little boy who you'll see with the T-shirt that's striped, blue and white striped. He usually didn't move around the room without support of an adult. And it wasn't till I looked back over the pictures that I realized that he was up and involved and dancing and moving without any adult prompt or direction. What's lovely here is a quote from one of the educators, is that it allowed the children to be engaged. For the children that were often running away from group activities, who found group activities too overwhelming, or there wasn't enough meaning to be made because so much of the direction from the adults was unspoken language, suddenly there was a place for them through the puppets and through drama to make meaning. And each and every one of them reacted, acted differently. And that brings us back to this concept of what inclusion actually looks like, where everyone's viewpoints are valued. Amanda, can we look at the next slide, please? Thank you, because I want to take us outside, because this is the same class, same group, in another part of the preschool day where not everyone was included, and this was outside play, where often you'd have little groups of children that would play together, and then other children who would play alone or who would be excluded. And the focus here was actually, this is little Miss Muffet. She sat on her tuffet and ate her curds away, and the children got to be spiders and frighten and make her run away, which everybody loved. What was gorgeous here was that another little boy who didn't generally play in group activities, he came, all the children were invited to join. No one ever was forced to join or was guided by an adult holding their hand. The puppets brought them. So this little guy would keep coming into the circle, but then he would run off, run up 3 stairs, do a little turn, and then run back down again. And at first, I think the educators thought that he was bolting and that he didn't want to be involved. But as he kept coming back, what we began to understand was that he was regulating his excitement. He was regulating his body and how he felt. And he would go away just a little bit out of from the group. And then when he felt calm, he would come back and rejoin. So it gave us the opportunity to start to see that this child wasn't avoiding. He was actually doing these different actions to stay connected. And the puppets helped us to see the intention behind what his actions were. So the puppets were very playful inside and outside.
So moving from puppetry to music, and I'm so enjoying Olivia's stories that I have to bring my focus back to thinking about mine. So I also have a quote from one of the educators in the centre where I was doing this particular study about the way that music allows children to communicate with each other and start to build relationships, and because instruments were regularly available, not just a large random selection, but a sort of fairly carefully curated selection for things like noise in the environment, reasons, and things that the children showed interest in, and sometimes things that had been used in a group time that they could then explore in their own ways, in their own times. And one of the things that educators often did with children who were more likely to be playing alone and less verbal communicators would be often to just sit with them when they were playing with music, and then start to gradually use the child as a model to imitate and respond musically to what the child was doing, allowing the child to lead a bit of a musical conversation, and then eventually working towards a turn-taking thing. And they found that the children of all levels of communication and styles of communication would often adopt that type of approach to playing instruments with each other, the following and leading and reciprocal musical conversations, and it became a way that some children formed friendships. And the main time that they would be together would be in the musical instrument area, where one would see the other playing with instruments and think, that's something we do together, and go over and join in. So this sense of belonging started to be created for some children who didn't play with other children in any other part of the play environment. And another story that came to mind when I was thinking about the idea of building relationships was a story from my teaching from a number of years ago, when I worked in a service that was not really inclusive at that time. Inclusion was in early childhood settings was not as much of a common thing as it is now. But every child in this setting at the time either had a disability, a very serious illness that required higher adult-to-child ratios, or a referral from community services at being in some sort of at-risk situation. And play skills and communication and relationships were often quite fraught in that setting. And there was one child who was 3 but developmentally more at a toddler level, and non-verbal, and very physically affectionate in a way with other children that other children didn't understand and found difficult. So he was beginning to use visuals for indicating choices in things, and so in terms of his functional communication from specialists, but we decided to use those for songs because he absolutely loved singing. So he could choose from his little folder with some cards with Velcro. He could pull one off and give it to you to indicate the song that he wanted you to sing, and that became something that he and I did a lot, and I was able to model that so other children would start to do it as well. And he had particular favourite songs, the main hit being Baba Black Sheep. So it became so as soon as he arrived in the morning, actually he often arrived first and I started work a little later, so I was on a slightly later shift, so I would arrive and he'd come straight over to me holding the picture of Baba Black Sheep and hand it to me, so I would have to start singing. And sometimes we'd have a joke where he would hand it to me and I would sing a different song. He would violently shake his head, and then I'd try a different song and he'd violently shake his head, and then I'd try another different song and he'd realise I was joking and laugh a lot, and then eventually we'd get to the right song. And again, that sort of modelling was something I was able to have other children come and join in, and then it became a spontaneous thing. And so he started to be able to build some relationships that were more intentional and felt safer for the other children. So it's a story that stuck with me because every time I sing Baba Black Sheep, I think of that young boy who's probably in his late teens now. And now we get to our third theme, which is about voice and how the arts, for example, puppetry and music, can give children a voice. And I'll hand back to Olivia.
And I think it really relates, Amanda, to, I loved your story about Baba Black Sheep, because in a funny way, that song was the connection. You know, that song became the connection between the two of you, and then that then expands to become between you and the child and other people. And I think it's what we're wanting to find with voice, and the way I see puppets as so valuable in bringing about voice is that they allow children a way to start participating in their community. It's very difficult sometimes for children, particularly children who experience disability, to say what's inside of them, to communicate that to someone else, and to know that they've been heard and understood is so important. That's why I've included this quote here, because voice suggests relationships, and it really speaks to what happened with these children here who were not really part of the whole group. They had a play that was very much defined by superheroes, very aggressive, and they became the little, almost like the preschool posse, and they would be telling other children they hated them and they wanted to kill them, and they do their Spider-Man things. And while I think it's very important for children to express these feelings inside of them without judgment, we want them to be able to express all parts of themselves. And within this group, there didn't seem to be permission to express anything else other than their rage and their power and their being Spider-Man. So what we did was that I used a very gentle, delicate baby dinosaur puppet. And if we go to the next slide, I think there's a picture of that puppet there. I'm hoping there is. No, there's just the quote about what one of the educators noticed with what happened is the puppet dinosaur was in an egg. So the puppet had to be hatched. And so just with this group of boys, I invited them to help me if the baby dinosaur hatched today. Could I count on them to help me take care of them? Because I didn't know what to do. And through that, it elicited their kindness. So they got to experience a form of play where they were now being the mummies and the daddies and caring for the dinosaur, feeding the dinosaur. And it was so much more powerful. It's like Mantle of the Expert in drama. Suddenly they're endowed with this belief that they are kind, careful, caring, protective, responsible. And it had an effect on their behaviour, and it began to expand their repertoire of play so that they could shift out of being the aggressive play folk and start to be much more gentle, caring nature. And this isn't just what I like to have another person's view of what I see. So this is one of the other educators' response, reflections of what she saw and how this puppet allowed a different voice to emerge in the children. And I think when we talk about inclusive practice, it's how we can use different creative arts approaches and strategies, be it a song, be it a puppet, be it a story, be it a paintbrush, that can evoke all the different voices within children in a place that's safe for that to be heard.
Thanks, Olivia. What struck me about this story is that it's a very good example of how drama, in this case through puppetry and story, allows children to that opportunity to step into someone else's shoes, the shoes of a mother hatching or father hatching a dinosaur, and to take on that different role. So seeing the world through those different eyes then gives them that chance to use their imagination and empathy to then have a different way of relating to each other and to other children in the classroom. So it is very much one of the powers of the dramatic in story arts, I think, that sort of thing. In writing about this sort of thing recently, I've done some research about empathy development and the fact that although empathy is innate in all of us, I think we can all see so many examples of there being not a big lack of empathy in the way that a lot of people relate to others in the world, on a large political scale or a small individual scale, and certainly through COVID there's been examples of that. And I think what it shows is that what the research says, which is that we all have the innate ability for empathy, but that it needs to be nurtured and developed, and it can be lost if it isn't. And I think the arts, in particular drama and story and children's literature, can enable children to have that experience of empathy, of seeing the world through different eyes. And I know our colleague Robin Ewing has written extensively about that sort of thing as well. So I thought I'd share this example from the recent research in the preschool about this particular child and his what I think is what's referred to in the research literature as children's social capital, and in terms of creating an inclusive classroom, a feeling of belonging for all children. We all know, we probably experienced it ourselves in our childhood, that different children have different cultural capital that gives them like status or value with their peers. And this particular child, who had some other challenges in his ability to socialize and get on well with other children, but he had this passion for Queen, the band Queen, and particularly the song We Will Rock You, and was quite into drumming type percussion and was really great at reproducing rhythms from songs that he had known well, particularly that famous rhythm from this song. And so he loved to do it on the cajon, which is, this is a children's version, which is I think a South American or Central American percussion instrument that makes different sounds that you can sit on it and play, and you get different sounds. It's got a bit of a snare inside it, like a snare drum on one side as well. So you get different sounds from playing it on different sides. It's a really fun instrument. He loved it, and he often played the Queen thing. So they included as the instrument that they would share and have turns on in group time, the cajon, because of this child. I've called him Giorgio's interest. And he was able to teach that rhythm to the other children, and they all really loved. He gave a very entertaining performance, which they all really loved, and it really helped to build his social capital in the classroom, his feeling of belonging, and then starting to build relationships. So they allowed his particular musical voice to be shared with all the children. Okay, so we've come to our final slide where we've just shared a few of the features that we feel are part of an inclusive pedagogy in the arts, but also beyond that, but certainly with the arts. And that is, of course, not necessarily just thinking about what you're teaching, but how you're teaching it as well. And what you're aiming for is not to necessarily achieve certain skill or knowledge outcomes with every child according to sort of a more rigid approach to curriculum, but actually just focusing on what's meaningful to each child, so that you have that strengths-based perspective that is your starting point. And of course, also with the diversity that's inherent in the arts, we need to, as all artistic people do, embrace that feeling of uncertainty, that feeling of not knowing, and of allowing children to show us. So I think that's an important one. And I think reflection and self-reflection is valuable for us. Also focusing on who we are, what's meaningful to us and our strengths. So we thought it would be lovely if you could share some words or very short phrases in the chat in terms of what your image of the child is, or what sort of creativity you might like to bring, or you already do bring into your teaching. So I'm going to stop sharing screen now, then we can all look at the chat on our own screens and maybe share some ideas in the chat. But I'm going to also hand over to Olivia for some final thoughts before we open the floor for discussion.
I think, just piggybacking on what you said, Amanda, about creative teachers are inclusive teachers, and inclusive teachers are creative teachers. And there is a real connection between that idea of recognizing that teaching is problematic in the sense that there's so many possibilities. And when we become open to those possibilities and not bound by having to get it right, because I don't know what right means for children. They're present, they're in the moment. And if we start viewing them and ourselves as perfectly imperfect and following what we're interested in, we begin to learn about that child and use them as a source of evidence to inform how we approach their work, by not making assumptions about what a child cannot do or should be doing, rather than seeing what they're interested in and drawing on their unique interests for every child. And we talk a lot, I think, Amanda, we've spoken a lot about children who experience disability, but it enriches the learning of every child. And I think that's what I think inclusive teaching, where the creative arts can bring so much to educators. And to draw on your own creativity. You know, I love puppetry, but I also love the bongo drums, and sometimes I bring them both together.
Olivia and Amanda, thanks so much. That's such a fascinating discussion of, I think we often see this as a space of limitation, and what I think you've uncapped for us is that it isn't actually a space of limitation. It's a space of deep creativity. And although there are inherent limitations that sometimes spur creativity on, it's a real non-deficit approach. It's a really positive, strengths-based approach that you've brought to this. And that's, I think, such a great gift to us all. So thank you for that gift. I suppose when you asked about one word that sums up kids, for me, it's bubbling. And it's the kind of quality that you talked about, the bubbling quality of creativity that you see through kids, and that when you engage with them in ways that they can kind of respond to. And you've just given us kind of a smorgasbord of approaches and ideas to really kind of encapsulate in our own processes. And I loved the question from Sue about the props, and I've actually seen Olivia working with props in early childhood context with material, and actually the response from the kids was extraordinary. Really enlivened them, it engaged them, but it also wasn't kind of chaotic. So that's was a wonderful thing to see in Olivia's teaching. So we've got some time for questions, and we love questions, but we don't insist on them. So if there are questions, please feel free just to unmute and ask them, or you can put them in the chat box if you feel like doing that. I'm going to start with one, which is, while people are thinking, what is it that you think the arts can do that other ways of engaging with learning with early childhood can't do? Or what is it that the arts does particularly well, I suppose, is a better way to put that question.
My first thought is that, and I think this doesn't just apply in early childhood, I think it applies with older children as well, is that I think children can show you a lot more about who they are, their sort of inner personality, their soul, if you like, in a way that you don't get from a child from a spelling test or solving a maths problem. That, you know, if you might get it in creative writing, I think, but anywhere where you're, as Sue said, playing and exploring ideas, is a comment Sue made in the chat, but where children are being creative and sharing something that comes out of their imagination or the imaginative interpretation of their life experience, and they've got the sort of open-endedness of whether it's drama or movement or dance or visual arts, or musical improvisation, that or song creation or poetry writing or whatever. You learn about the child, you get to know them, and they get to share who they are. And doesn't that feel good at any stage in a sort of unequal power relationship, which teacher-child always is to some extent, when you get a chance to share and for a teacher to acknowledge that they've acknowledged you as you, something that's meaningful to you, which, some children might find completing maths problems incredibly meaningful, and other children it's like just one of those things you do because it's at school. So that's one thought I have. Olivia.
And I agree with you, Amanda. I mean, everyone, just take a minute and look at me now. Hello, how are you? Nice to talk. Lovely to meet you, Sue. Lovely to meet you, Michael. Hello, Amanda. Hi, Anna. Look at me now, and then look at me now. Hi. Hello. How do you go? I'm fine, Tweak. How are you? Now, who do you want to talk to more if you're a child? Suddenly, it's what the arts do to us, just as much as how they impact children. It's the effect they have on our teaching. It opens us up as educators as well. And I mean, there is just an aspect of the creative arts that affects the way we teach, that shifts our thinking, shifts our perception, adjusts our manner and the way we listen and talk. We're more playful, we're more creative, we're more fun, which then leads to more relationships. And I don't know that any other area does that as well as the creative arts can. I think that's a big difference for us as teachers. I think it does a number on us. I don't know. What do you think of that, Amanda?
Yeah, I would agree. But then we'd all be different in different ways with different types of arts, because it's also what particularly speaks to us.
Yes.
Yeah. Sue, in terms of, Michael, your first question, Sue's point in the chat is interesting. Sue, you mentioned about using the senses and not just always rely on language. And I think children are more sensory, physical beings. They're, I think, wired that way, particularly in the early years, because that's a way of learning and developing in the world. So, the arts allow a lot of that to happen.
Particularly if spoken language isn't your primary method of communication. And if we start thinking about children with autism, the language isn't necessarily, particularly spoken language, going to be their richest way of making meaning.
Sure. And then you've also got at every level, certainly in the earlier years and the early years of school, you've got children whose ability in English is variable. And even then, as children's language is still developing, they don't always have the word language to express themselves. So to being able to also draw, paint, make a puppet, bring a puppet to life, dance or whatever, it's there's so much more that they can express that way.
That's wonderful, and such a great way to, I think, conclude, unless we've got any more questions. If we have any questions, ask now, or, forever keep your peace, or keep your peace.
Or email us.
Or email. Yeah, you don't have to keep your peace at all. So just by way of finishing, thank you so much, Amanda and Olivia, for just taking us on such a wonderful, engaging tour of this world that you create in your classrooms. I mean, as a secondary educator, I just stand in awe of early childhood educators everywhere, and just wonder and enjoy seeing them teach. And I've certainly had the joy of watching Olivia teach. Haven't had the joy of watching Amanda teach, but I'm sure I'd see many of the same features. So thank you so much for your time tonight. Again, apologies for those of you who we made wait, but it was probably worth waiting for, I would say. So thanks very much, everyone. Please click on that link if you want to go and join Create and see many more kind of seminars like this. And of course, if you want to follow up with any of the discussions tonight, Olivia and Amanda would be more than happy to receive your emails. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Olivia and Amanda, and have a great night.
Michael. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks, Michael,
night.
Anna, and Olivia.